After I refused to pay for my sister Chloe's $350,000 wedding, my parents invited me to a family dinner. 3 lawyers were already waiting with documents. My mother smirked and said, "Sign this, or you will regret it." I just said, "Meet my husband." What happened after that changed everything. My name is Maya Jenkins. I am 32 years old and the CEO of a cybersecurity and financial technology firm in Atlanta. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to use you. The air inside the exclusive Buckhead restaurant was thick with the scent of expensive steak and aged wine. It was a Tuesday evening, and the private dining room my mother Vivian had booked screamed of the desperate need to project wealth. Growing up in Atlanta, image was everything to my mother. She was the communications director for one of the largest megachurches in the city, a woman who treated her sorority membership and social standing like a religion of its own. I was always the family outcast. I chose to build a tech startup in my 20s instead of marrying a doctor or a lawyer right out of college, which made me entirely useless to her public relations campaigns. But tonight, she needed me. I walked into the private room wearing a simple navy blue tailored suit. I did not need to wear designer labels covered in logos to know my net worth. Sitting around the long mahogany table was a picture of orchestrated intimidation. My mother Vivian sat at the head of the table, her pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. Next to her was my younger sister Chloe, 28 years old and completely obsessed with her lifestyle influencer image on social media. Beside Chloe sat her fiancé, Preston Sterling. Preston was a 33-year-old white man who claimed to work in wealth management on Wall Street. He always carried an air of unearned superiority, acting as if his presence alone elevated our family status. And then there were the 3 men in cheap suits sitting across from them. "Maya, how nice of you to finally join us," my mother said. Her voice carried that sweet melodic tone she used right before she tried to destroy someone. "Have a seat." I remained standing. I looked at the 3 strangers, then at Preston, who was swirling a glass of bourbon with a smug expression. "I was told this was a family dinner, Mom." "Who are these gentlemen?" Preston chuckled and leaned back in his leather chair. "They are my legal counsel, Maya. We are here to resolve a minor administrative issue regarding the wedding finances. As you know, Chloe and I are planning the event of the season, and it requires a certain level of liquidity." My mother slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood table. It stopped right in front of me. I looked down at the document. It was a legal waiver, a deeply flawed and aggressively drafted contract demanding that I assume full liability for a $90,000 home equity loan. A loan that had been fraudulently taken out using my name, my social security number, and my impeccable credit score. I looked up at my mother. I felt no tears, no heartbreak, just a cold, terrifying clarity. "You forged my signature to steal $90,000 from a bank." "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed, glancing nervously at the closed door of the private room. "We did not steal anything. You have millions of dollars tied up in that tech company of yours. $90,000 is pocket change to you. But to Chloe, it is the difference between a beautiful wedding and a total embarrassment. Preston comes from an elite family, Maya. We cannot look like beggars in front of his relatives. You owe this family." Chloe chimed in, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "Maya, please do not be selfish. I already booked the florist and the caterer. If you report this to the police, the funds will be frozen and you will ruin my $350,000 dream wedding. Why do you always have to be the difficult one? Black women are supposed to uplift each other, but you just want to see me fail." The sheer audacity of her statement made me want to laugh. She was using the language of empowerment to justify identity theft. I turned my attention back to Preston. "And you, the supposed Wall Street genius, needed your future mother-in-law to commit bank fraud just to pay for some flowers and a party." Preston slammed his glass down. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya. You are going to sign that waiver, assuming responsibility for the debt. If you do not, I will personally ensure that your little startup gets dragged through the mud. I know people in the financial sector. I know investors. I can make one phone call and dry up your funding overnight. Do not play games with me. You are out of your league. I stared at Preston. He truly believed he held all the cards. He relied on his privilege and his aggressive tone to intimidate a black woman he assumed was just lucky to be in business. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no idea that my cybersecurity software had flagged the fraudulent loan the second the funds were routed to his personal business accounts. He had no idea that I already knew he was not using the money for a wedding. "I will not sign this," I said, my voice steady and deadly calm, "and I will not pay a single cent toward this delusion you call a wedding." My mother stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "You will sign it, Maya. If you walk out that door and call the authorities, you will no longer have a family. I will make sure every person in Atlanta knows you are a bitter, jealous woman who tried to destroy her sister out of spite." The three men in cheap suits finally decided to speak up. The one sitting closest to Preston cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Miss Jenkins, my name is Arthur, and I represent Mr. Sterling. I strongly advise you to consider the civil liabilities you might face if you breach the familial trust established here. We have documentation ready to file that would tie up your personal assets in litigation for years. Signing this waiver is the most cost-effective way to protect your business and your reputation." I looked at the man named Arthur. I noticed his suit was frayed at the cuffs. His watch was a cheap imitation of a luxury brand. These men were not elite corporate lawyers. They were intimidation actors, likely associates Preston had scraped together to bully me into submission. "Litigation for years," I repeated slowly, letting the threat hang in the quiet air of the dining room. "You want to sue me for refusing to accept a fraudulent loan that was illegally obtained using my stolen identity. That is a fascinating legal strategy. Did you learn that in law school, or did Preston teach you that trick while you were running his errands?" Preston stood up, his face flushing red with anger. "We are giving you a chance to handle this quietly, Maya. Do not be stupid. You think the police will care about a family dispute over a loan? You think anyone is going to take your side over mine when I bring my firm into this? You sign the paper, you pay the money, and everyone walks away happy. If you refuse, I will personally ruin you." My mother crossed her arms, nodding in agreement with Preston. "You heard him, Maya. Stop throwing a tantrum and be a team player for once in your miserable life. Your sister deserves this wedding." I picked up the manila folder, feeling the heavy paper between my fingers. I looked at Chloe, who was pouting and taking a sip of her champagne, completely disconnected from the reality of the felonies being discussed. I looked at my mother, a woman who would happily sacrifice my freedom and my hard work just to maintain a fake image of wealth for her church friends. Then I looked back at Preston and his three fake lawyers. "I am not going to call the local police," I said, dropping the folder back onto the table. "I agree that local police might find a family dispute tedious. But unfortunately for you, bank fraud across state lines, wire fraud, and identity theft are not local matters." Arthur scoffed, leaning forward. "Are you threatening us with federal charges, Miss Jenkins? That is highly inappropriate and legally baseless. You have no proof and you have no authority." I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that made the room temperature feel like it had dropped 10 degrees. "You are absolutely right, Arthur. I have no federal authority, but I brought someone with me who does. Allow me to introduce you to my husband." The heavy wooden door of the private dining room swung open. My mother gasped and took a step back. Chloe nearly dropped her champagne glass. They did not even know I was dating anyone, let alone married. I had kept my personal life strictly private, knowing exactly how my mother destroyed anything good I brought around her. Marcus stepped into the room. He was 36 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, and possessed a commanding presence that immediately shrank Preston and his fake lawyers down to size. Marcus walked directly to the table, standing right beside me. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, and tossed it onto the mahogany table. The wallet flipped open, revealing a gold badge. "Assistant United States Attorney Marcus Davenport," he said, his deep voice echoing off the walls. "I specialize in prosecuting white-collar crimes, specifically wire fraud and financial exploitation." The color instantly drained from Arthur's face. The other two fake lawyers physically recoiled in their chairs, their eyes locked on the federal badge shining under the chandelier light. Marcus placed his hands on the table and leaned toward Preston. "Mr. Sterling, my wife informed me that someone used her identity to secure a $90,000 loan. We traced the IP address to Vivian Jenkins's home network. We then traced the routing numbers. The funds did not go to a wedding planner, a florist, or a caterer. The funds went directly into an offshore account linked to Preston Sterling Wealth Management, an account that is currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for operating a Ponzi scheme." Preston staggered backward, his knees hitting his chair. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The arrogant, privileged facade he had worn just 3 minutes ago completely dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, sweaty fraud. Arthur grabbed his briefcase, his hands trembling violently. "We are not his lawyers," Arthur stammered, looking frantically at Marcus. "We are just independent contractors. We do not represent him in any official capacity. We have nothing to do with any federal crimes." "Sit down," Marcus commanded. The three men froze, hovering halfway out of their seats. "You will stay right there until the agents I have stationed in the lobby come up to collect your statements. If you attempt to leave this room, you will be charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." My mother collapsed into her chair, clutching her chest as if she could not breathe. "Marcus, husband, federal investigation." She stammered, looking at me with wild, terrified eyes. "Maya, what have you done? You brought the federal government into family business. You are sending your own mother to prison." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but contempt. "I did not bring them here, Mom. You did. You chose to steal from me. You chose to threaten me. You chose to prioritize a fake wedding over my life. Now you get to deal with the consequences of your choices. Enjoy your dinner." As Marcus and I finally walked out of that private dining room, leaving my furious mother grasping her chest and Preston sweating profusely through his expensive designer suit, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The true breaking point had occurred exactly 3 weeks prior, inside a blindingly white luxury bridal boutique located in the very heart of Buckhead. My mother guilt-tripped me into attending Chloe's final dress fitting. When I arrived, Chloe was standing on a velvet pedestal, admiring her reflection. She wore an outrageously expensive custom Vera Wang gown, heavily embroidered with imported lace. My mother sat on a plush velvet sofa, holding complimentary champagne. "You look like royalty, Chloe," my mother proclaimed. "This is exactly what a Jenkins woman deserves." Chloe twirled. "It screams old money. It is exactly what Preston expects." I stood near the entrance checking an email. I had already paid for the VIP fitting room reservation simply to keep the peace. But my peace evaporated the moment I heard Chloe address the lead sales associate. "We will take it," Chloe announced. "Run the payment now." The associate smiled. "The total for the gown and custom alterations comes to $25,400. How will we settle this?" Chloe casually gestured in my direction. "My sister is covering it. Put it on her card on file." I froze. My mother took another sip of champagne, completely unbothered. "Excuse me," I said. "Cancel that transaction immediately. Do not charge my card." The associate stopped tapping on her screen. Chloe spun around, her smile dropping. "Maya, what are you doing? You said you would support my wedding. I never agreed to buy you a $25,000 dress. I am not financing your delusions." My mother slammed her glass down. "Maya, do not embarrass us. Your sister is marrying into the Sterling family. She cannot wear a clearance dress. Stop being stingy and pay." "You want her to wear a $25,000 dress, Mom? Then you pay for it. My company's revenue is not your personal slush fund." Preston strutted inside, looking like he owned the building. He took one look at the tense atmosphere and immediately shifted into his condescending savior persona. "Ladies, what is the problem here?" Preston asked, wrapping an arm around Chloe, who instantly began producing crocodile tears. "Maya is trying to ruin my day," Chloe sobbed, burying her face in his chest. "She promised to help with the dress, and now she is backing out just to humiliate me." Preston sighed heavily, looking at me with a mixture of pity and arrogant disappointment. He stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Maya, we are talking about your sister's special day. I have seen the financial reports you posted about your company's recent funding round. You are sitting on millions. We are planning a $350,000 wedding to properly merge our families and establish our status in Atlanta. You should be honored to contribute to that. I stared at this arrogant white man, trying to dictate how I spent my self-made wealth. I should be honored to contribute to a $350,000 party, I asked, keeping my tone dangerously level. Preston gave a patronizing smile. Absolutely. You people are always talking about Black excellence, right? About uplifting your community and supporting your family. Well, here is your chance, Maya. Put your money where your mouth is. Fund this wedding. Elevate your family's image. It is an investment in Chloe's future, and quite frankly, it makes you look good too. The sheer racial and financial audacity of his statement hung in the air. He was weaponizing a cultural concept he barely understood just to manipulate me into funding a party he could not afford. He thought I was just an insecure Black woman desperate for proximity to his supposed white elitism. He thought invoking family loyalty would make me surrender my credit card. I took a step closer to Preston, forcing him to look me dead in the eye. Let me make something crystal clear to you, Preston. Black Excellence is building a multi-million-dollar technology firm from scratch without a single handout. It is working 18-hour days to secure patents and federal contracts. It is not bullying your sister into buying a $25,000 dress you cannot afford to impress people who do not care about you. Preston's condescending smile vanished. His jaw tightened, but before he could speak, I turned to the stunned sales associate. Remove my credit card from your system immediately, I instructed her. If a single charge goes through, I will have my legal team file a fraud claim before the bank closes today. My mother stood up, her face flushed with absolute rage. Maya Jenkins, you are a disgrace to this family. If you walk out that door, do not bother coming to the wedding. I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of liberation. That is the best offer you have given me in years, Mom. Enjoy figuring out how to pay for this fairy tale. I turned on my heel and walked out of the boutique, leaving them standing in stunned silence. I thought that establishing that firm boundary would be the absolute end of their financial entitlement. I thought walking away from the ridiculous $350,000 wedding demand had fully protected my hard-earned assets. I had no idea that my firm refusal in that boutique was exactly what pushed my mother and Preston to take a much darker, more desperate and criminal path. They finally realized they could not manipulate me into handing over my money willingly, so they decided they would simply steal it behind my back instead. And that decision led directly to the digital security alert I received 3 weeks later, which uncovered the $90,000 fraudulent loan that ultimately sealed their miserable fate. 4 days before that catastrophic dinner at the restaurant, I was sitting at the head of a massive glass table in the boardroom of my company. We occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek high-rise in Midtown Atlanta, a testament to the sweat and sleepless nights I had poured into building my cybersecurity and financial technology firm. My lead developers were presenting a quarterly update on our proprietary fraud detection software. The algorithm we designed was specifically engineered to catch identity theft and unauthorized credit monitoring anomalies in real time. It was a multi-million-dollar product that banks were lining up to license. I was actively taking notes on a tablet when my personal smartwatch vibrated with a sharp double pulse. It was a silent, high-priority alert directly from the beta version of our own security software, which I had linked to my personal social security number for testing purposes. I glanced down at my wrist, expecting a false positive or a routine credit inquiry from a vendor. Instead, the glowing red text on the small screen made my blood run absolutely cold. A $90,000 home equity line of credit had just been officially approved and fully dispersed under my identity. I held up a hand, signaling my developers to pause the presentation. The room fell perfectly silent. My lead engineer asked if everything was all right. I smiled smoothly, projecting the absolute calm I had mastered over years of navigating high-stakes corporate environments. I told them to take a 15-minute coffee break. The moment the heavy glass doors clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the boardroom, I opened my encrypted laptop and bypassed the standard banking portals, diving straight into the back-end data architecture. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my hands remained entirely steady. Someone had bypassed basic verification protocols. They had used my exact social security number, my previous tax returns, and my mother's maiden name to push through a massive loan. I quickly pulled the digital footprint of the digital signature used to authorize the final paperwork. In the modern digital age, criminals leave traces everywhere. They assume borrowing money online provides a shield of anonymity, but they do not understand how deep network tracing can go. I ran the originating Internet Protocol address through my company-localized geolocation software. I expected it to bounce to some hacker collective overseas or a domestic fraud ring operating out of a dark basement. The progress bar flashed across my screen, analyzing data packets and running cross-references. When the final geographic coordinates populated on my monitor, the breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. The loan application had not been submitted from an offshore server. It had been submitted from a residential internet service provider located in a highly exclusive gated community in Buckhead. I knew the address immediately because I had paid the property taxes on that estate 3 years in a row when my mother complained about being short on cash. The call had come from inside the house. My own mother, Vivienne Jenkins, had committed federal identity theft against her own flesh and blood. I sat back in my leather chair staring at the flashing green dot on my screen. She had actually done it. After I walked out of that bridal boutique refusing to fund Chloe's extravagant $350,000 wedding, they had panicked. Instead of scaling back their ridiculous vanity project, they decided to steal my credit and my assets to maintain their fake facade of black excellence. But Vivian was not smart enough to execute a sophisticated financial crime on her own. She did not know how to bypass multi-factor authentication or structure a loan application to guarantee instant approval. She needed an insider. She needed someone who understood wealth management and lending loopholes. I launched a secondary trace focusing entirely on the routing numbers where the bank had dispersed the $90,000. I followed the digital money trail as it bounced through a clearinghouse and landed squarely in a corporate checking account. The name on the destination account was Preston Sterling Wealth Management. The wire transfer had been fraudulently categorized under the memo line as floral and catering expenses for the Jenkins wedding. Preston, the arrogant white man who had tried to lecture me about uplifting my family, had actively orchestrated bank fraud using my mother as his accomplice. He used his professional credentials to push the loan through rapid underwriting, and he used my mother's access to my personal identifying information to sign the digital paperwork. A profound, chilling realization washed over me. This was not just about a wedding dress or expensive champagne. This was a calculated criminal conspiracy. They genuinely believed I would never find out until the wedding was over. And even if I did find out, they assumed I would be too embarrassed by the social scandal to report my own mother to the police. They banked on my silence. They weaponized family loyalty, believing I would just absorb the debt to protect Vivian's position at her megachurch and Chloe's fragile social media reputation. They thought I was a vulnerable target who would bow down to their intimidation. I picked up my cell phone and dialed my husband. Marcus was in his federal office, likely buried in case files. He answered on the second ring, his deep voice instantly grounding me. I did not cry or panic. I simply gave him the facts. I told him my mother and his future brother-in-law had just committed federal wire fraud. I could hear the immediate shift in his demeanor. The loving husband vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless federal prosecutor. He told me to lock down all the evidence, export the logs, and print the routing documentation. He said he was launching a silent inquiry into Preston Sterling immediately. The trap was officially set. The end was near for them. I disconnected the call with Marcus, grabbed the freshly printed stack of network logs, and walked straight to the private elevator. I did not wait to cool down. The drive from my midtown office to the sprawling gated estates of Buckhead took exactly 22 minutes. I pulled my car into the circular driveway of my mother's residence, the tires crunching softly against the pristine gravel. The house was a massive columned monstrosity that Vivian Jenkins treated as her personal kingdom. It was a physical manifestation of her obsession with appearances funded by years of manipulating everyone around her. I marched up the stone steps and let myself in through the heavy mahogany front doors, the folder of evidence gripped tightly in my hand. Inside, the grand foyer echoed with the sound of classical music and clinking crystal. I found my mother and Chloe in the formal living room surrounded by velvet swatches, gold foil invitation samples, and massive floral arrangements. They were sipping sparkling water and laughing thoroughly, enjoying the illusion of wealth they had just stolen from me. My mother looked up, a momentary flash of surprise crossing her perfectly contoured face, before she quickly masked it with her usual condescending smirk. "Maya," she said, setting her glass down on a silver coaster. "I am surprised you showed up here. Did you finally come to your senses and realize how embarrassing your behavior at the bridal boutique was?" Chloe did not even look up from a catalog of imported silk napkins. She just sighed heavily, playing the role of the exhausted, victimized bride. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I walked straight to the antique coffee table, swept a pile of ridiculously overpriced wedding invitations onto the floor, and slammed the manila folder down. "I'd just received a security alert from my company's fraud detection network," I said, my voice cutting through the classical music like a blade. "A $90,000 home equity loan was approved under my Social Security number 3 hours ago. The application was routed from the IP address of this exact house. The funds were wired straight to Preston Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe finally dropped her catalog, her mouth falling open. My mother froze, her eyes darting from the folder on the table to my face. I expected panic. I expected denial. I expected them to crumble under the weight of being caught red-handed, committing a federal offense. Instead, I witnessed a masterclass in psychological manipulation. My mother slowly picked up her sparkling water, took a deliberate sip, and leaned back into the expensive upholstery of her sofa. She did not look ashamed. She looked profoundly annoyed. "You are being completely dramatic, Maya," she said smoothly. "It is a temporary line of credit. Preston knows exactly what he is doing with the finances. The money will be paid back long before you even need to look at your credit report. We just needed immediate liquid capital to secure the venue and the caterers." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her absolute lack of morality. "You committed identity theft, Mom. You committed bank fraud. You used my private tax records to steal money. Stop throwing those ugly legal words around my house," my mother snapped, her voice rising sharply. "I did what I had to do because you refused to step up. You left me with absolutely no choice. You have millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts doing nothing. You are a single woman with no husband, no children, and no social standing in this city outside of your little computer business. You are selfish, Maya. You are hoarding wealth while your own sister is trying to establish a legacy." Chloe immediately jumped in, sensing the opportunity to play the victim. "You are so hateful, Maya. You could easily pay for this wedding without even noticing the money is gone. But you want me to look like a beggar. You want Preston's family to think we are just some poor, uneducated black family who cannot afford a proper celebration." "That is exactly it!" my mother shouted, standing up and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "Preston's parents are flying in from Connecticut. They are members of elite country clubs. They come from old money. This entire city, my entire congregation at the church is watching us. Do you have any idea how it would look if the Jenkins family threw a cheap budget wedding? We would be a laughingstock. I will not allow you to humiliate us in front of these elite white people just because you are too bitter to share your success." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. The sheer racial insecurity and desperate vanity rolling off my mother was suffocating. "You committed a felony so you could impress a mediocre white man and his country club parents," I asked, my tone dripping with pure disgust. "You risked federal prison to buy floral centerpieces." "I raised you," my mother shrieked, advancing toward me. "I sacrificed my youth, my body, and my money to make sure you went to the best schools. You owe this family your success." Everything you have built is because I pushed you. You owe Chloe this wedding. It is your duty to subsidize this family's image. We are trying to project Black excellence to the world, and you are acting like a greedy, selfish miser. Black excellence is not built on stolen credit cards and fraudulent loans, I fired back, standing my ground. You are not protecting a legacy, you are running a scam. And Preston is using you to do it. You think he respects you. He is treating you like a disposable pawn to fund a party he cannot afford himself. Do not you dare speak about Preston that way, Chloe yelled, stepping forward with her fists clenched. He is giving me a life you could never dream of. You are just jealous because you are 32 years old and totally alone. No man wants a cold, heartless woman who puts money over her own blood. That is why you are miserable. That is why you are trying to ruin my happiness. I looked at my sister, entirely consumed by her fake social media persona, and my mother completely blinded by her desperate need for high society validation. They were gaslighting me, attempting to twist an egregious federal crime into a narrative where I was the villain for noticing I had been robbed. They genuinely believed that if they screamed loud enough and threw enough guilt at me, I would simply accept the $90,000 debt and slink away in silence to preserve the family secret. I reached down and picked up the empty manila folder, leaving the printed IP logs and routing numbers scattered across their expensive coffee table. I am not going to argue with you about loyalty, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have 48 hours to reverse that loan and return every single cent to the bank. If that money is not cleared from my credit profile, I am turning all of this over to the authorities. I will not pay for your delusions, and I will not go down for your crimes. You would not dare, my mother scoffed, crossing her arms. You care too much about your pristine corporate image to let the media find out your own mother is under investigation. You will keep your mouth shut, Maya. You will accept this loan, and you will show up to the wedding with a smile on your face. I turned my back on them and walked toward the grand foyer. Watch me, I said without looking back. I pulled the heavy front door open, the afternoon humidity of Atlanta hitting my face. Behind me, my mother was still yelling, her voice echoing off the marble floors of her fake kingdom. She was demanding respect, demanding obedience, and demanding my silence. I stepped out into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my heels, and got back into my car. As I gripped the steering wheel, my hands were finally shaking, not from fear, but from the massive surge of adrenaline. They had shown me exactly who they were. There was no mother left to mourn and no sister left to protect. There was only a criminal conspiracy wearing the faces of my family. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the gates, ready to let Marcus and the federal government burn their entire world to the ground. The drive back to my midtown penthouse was surprisingly quiet. The adrenaline that had spiked during my confrontation with Preston slowly leveled out, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I knew exactly what my mother would do next. Vivian Jenkins was a creature of public relations. When intimidation failed, she always pivoted to narrative control. She had spent her entire adult life curating a flawless image of Black excellence for the affluent society of Atlanta. She was the communications director for one of the largest and most influential megachurches in the state, a position that granted her immense social power and an unquestioning audience. I knew she would not wait for the bank fraud to become public knowledge. She needed to discredit me immediately, ensuring that when the truth finally surfaced, the community would view me as an unreliable, unhinged narrator. She needed to strike first, and she did. By the time I parked my car in the secure underground garage of my building, the Whisper network was already activated. My phone began to light up with notifications not from my mother or sister, but from extended family members and prominent figures in our community. The smear campaign had officially launched. My mother executed her plan with the precision of a seasoned political operative. She utilized her Sunday morning congregation and her elite sorority alumni group to plant the seeds of my supposed destruction. According to the furious passive-aggressive text messages I began receiving from my aunts and cousins, my mother had tearfully confessed to her prayer circle that I was suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. She spun a tragic, beautifully crafted tale about how the stress of running a technology startup had fractured my mind. She told the church elders that I was hallucinating financial crimes and lashing out at my own family. To make the lie even more convincing, she weaponized my relationship status. She claimed that at 32 years old, I was consumed by a bitter, toxic jealousy over Chloe's impending marriage to Preston. She painted a picture of a lonely, desperate woman who could not handle seeing her younger sister achieve the ultimate dream of a lavish wedding and a wealthy husband. In my mother's fabricated reality, I was actively trying to sabotage the union out of pure, unadulterated spite. She asked her congregation to pray for my troubled soul. The speed at which the Atlanta elite consumed and regurgitated this false narrative was astounding. Within 24 hours, I was completely isolated from the social ecosystem I had grown up in. Women who had known me since childhood sent me lengthy, condescending emails wrapped in the guise of Christian concern. They quoted scripture urging me to seek professional psychiatric help and to repent for trying to ruin my sister's special day. My own godfather, a respected deacon at the church, left a voicemail expressing his deep disappointment in my selfish behavior. He told me that uplifting the family was a sacred duty, and my refusal to contribute financially to the wedding was a disgrace to our community values. He completely ignored the fact that my identity had been stolen blindly, accepting my mother's version of events. Chloe, playing her part flawlessly, posted cryptic, tearful updates on her social media accounts about cutting toxic energy out of her life to protect her peace before the wedding. Her followers flooded the comments with support, condemning the unnamed jealous sister who was trying to dim her light. The social isolation was intended to break me. My mother believed that the overwhelming pressure of being ostracized by our entire extended family and the upper echelons of Atlanta society would force me into submission. She thought I would eventually absorb the $90,000 fraudulent loan and beg for her forgiveness just to be allowed back into the fold. The strategy might have worked when I was a vulnerable teenager desperate for maternal approval, but I was no longer a child seeking validation. The coordinated character assassination did not shatter my resolve. Instead, it hardened my heart into absolute steel. Every fake prayer request, every condescending text message, and every social media post only provided more evidence of their profound moral bankruptcy. I took screenshots of every single message. I archived every voicemail. I documented the smear campaign meticulously, knowing that their public lies would make their eventual federal indictments infinitely more devastating. I was building an impenetrable fortress of evidence brick by miserable brick. The real test of my mother's smear campaign occurred when the vicious rumors attempted to bleed directly into my professional life. A prominent venture capitalist whose wife sat on the exact same charity board as my mother requested an emergency virtual meeting with me today. He awkwardly danced around the subject, mentioning that he had heard troubling rumors regarding my mental stability and questioning if my company's leadership was stable. I did not flinch or offer any defensive explanations at all. I calmly shared my screen presenting our latest quarterly growth metrics, our flawless security audits, and our newly secured federal contracts. I looked him dead in the eye and advised him never to confuse bored suburban gossip with hard, verifiable corporate data. He immediately apologized for his overstep and reaffirmed his investment in my firm without hesitation. That brief interaction solidified my ultimate realization. My family's power only existed within the fragile, superficial bubble they had constructed for themselves. Outside of their Sunday church functions and exclusive country club dinners, their opinions held zero weight. They were entirely powerless in the real world. I closed my laptop and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city. I was entirely alone in my family, but I had never felt more powerful. I pulled out my phone to text Marcus, ready to review the financial evidence he had gathered against Preston. It was finally time to pull the trigger. Before the encrypted files had even finished routing to Marcus, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Pastor Thomas. He was the senior leader of the sprawling megachurch where my mother wielded absolute influence. I answered out of morbid curiosity. The pastor spoke with a rehearsed tone of pastoral concern layered over deep condescension. He informed me my mother had addressed the entire women ministry during their Wednesday service. She stood at the pulpit weeping perfectly calculated tears and requested a massive prayer circle for my rapidly deteriorating mental health. She told 2,000 congregants, the pressures of corporate life broke my mind, causing me to invent cruel financial delusions about my own family. She painted a vivid picture of a deeply disturbed woman consumed by bitter jealousy over her own sister, beautiful wedding actively attempting to sabotage the joyous union. Pastor Thomas urged me to step away from my company and submit to a psychiatric intervention overseen by church elders. He stated my refusal to fund Chloe's marriage was a clear symptom of a hardened, unchristian heart, blinded by secular wealth. I listened to his entire speech, without interrupting a single syllable. When he finally finished his sermon on family duty, I calmly asked him if my mother had also requested prayers for her recent $90,000 bank fraud. The pastor gasped, deeply offended by the accusation. I advised him to secure independent legal counsel for the church before acting as a character witness for a woman under federal investigation. I hung up the phone, blocking his number immediately. My mother was actively attempting to scorch the earth so nothing could ever grow back. The assault did not stop with the church. The following morning, the elite sorority network my mother cherished launched their coordinated offensive. A package was hand-delivered to the concierge desk of my luxury building. It was a formal letter of censure signed by 5 high-ranking alumni members, including 2 of my own aunts. The heavy cardstock letter accused me of violating their sacred sisterhood principles by displaying a gross lack of respect for my matriarch. They demanded I issue a public apology to Chloe and absorb the wedding costs as restorative justice for the emotional trauma I inflicted upon the family. If I refused, they threatened to leverage their corporate connections across Atlanta to blacklist my technology firm from upcoming municipal contracts. They thought their prestige gave them the power to extort me into silence. I took the letter and fed it directly into my office shredder. The sheer audacity of these women attempting to bully me into paying for a fraudulent wedding was astonishing. They blindly enabled a criminal conspiracy because they worshipped social status above all else. They only cared about protecting the flawless image of Black excellence that Vivian Jenkins projected. Their threats were empty anyway. My company did not rely on local municipal contracts handed out at country club luncheons. We secured highly classified federal contracts validated by rigorous security clearances none of these women could comprehend. But the coordinated isolation tactics were clear. My mother was trying to starve me of all social support, hoping loneliness would break my spirit. She severely underestimated how comfortable I was in the dark. Growing up as the constant disappointment taught me to thrive in isolation. While they were busy hosting prayer circles and drafting ridiculous censure letters, I was finalizing the digital guillotine that would permanently sever them from polite society. I left my office and drove directly to the secure federal building in downtown Atlanta where Marcus worked. I bypassed the standard security checkpoints using the spouse clearance protocol Marcus arranged. I walked straight into his private office, locking the heavy wooden door behind me. Marcus was standing by a massive whiteboard, reviewing a complex web of financial transactions linking Preston Sterling to multiple shell companies. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and focused entirely on the mission. He handed me a thick dossier detailing the absolute reality of Preston Wealth Management Firm. The $90,000 home equity loan my mother had stolen using my identity was just a tiny drop in a massive ocean of fraud. Preston was not a legitimate Wall Street investor. He was a high-end con artist running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme specifically targeting affluent minority families desperate to elevate their social standing. He preyed on their insecurities using his white privilege and fake corporate pedigree to blind them to the obvious red flags. He had been siphoning millions of dollars from his clients to fund his own lavish lifestyle, and now his fraudulent empire was rapidly collapsing under the weight of its own debt. Marcus explained that Preston desperately needed a large influx of clean liquid cash to pay off aggressive early investors, threatening to expose him to the Securities and Exchange Commission. That was the real reason he pushed my mother to secure the fraudulent home equity loan. The money was never intended for Chloe Vera Wang dress or custom floral arrangements. The wedding was a desperate distraction. "We are not going to move quietly," I told Marcus, keeping my voice remarkably calm. "I do not want a discreet plea deal. I do not want a quiet settlement behind closed doors to protect the family name. I want maximum exposure. I want the church congregation, the sorority sisters, and every single person who participated in this smear campaign to witness exactly who Vivian Jenkins truly is." Marcus smiled, a cold, calculating expression that perfectly matched my own. "The grand jury convenes on Friday," he confirmed. "We will secure the sealed indictments by the weekend." The timing could not be more poetic. Friday was the exact day of Chloe's lavish rehearsal dinner. The countdown to their ultimate destruction officially began, and I was ready to watch them burn down to the absolute ground, and I would not shed a single tear when they finally realized their massive, catastrophic mistake. Silence in the penthouse was absolute. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to believe that family was a loud, constant presence, demanding attention and resources at all hours of the day. My phone used to vibrate continuously with group chat notifications, trivial arguments, and demands for my time. Now, the screen remained completely dark. My mother's smear campaign had executed its primary objective with terrifying efficiency. The isolation was not a gradual fading away. It was an immediate, aggressive severing of all ties. I sat on my velvet sofa, watching the city lights of Atlanta flicker through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt the profound psychological weight of being totally erased by the people who shared my blood. I opened my social media accounts to assess the damage. It was worse than I anticipated. Aunts who had kissed my cheeks at Thanksgiving had blocked me. Cousins I had tutored in college had unfollowed me and removed me from their wedding photos. The family group chat where Chloe and Vivian usually posted daily updates about the extravagant wedding preparations had been deleted and replaced with a new one that explicitly excluded me. I was a ghost to them now. They decided that preserving the illusion of my mother perfection was more important than the truth of my existence. I was the scapegoat sacrificed on the altar of their extreme vanity. The social fallout extended well beyond the boundaries of my immediate relatives. The following morning, I attended a scheduled breakfast meeting with a mid-level software vendor who had supplied my firm for 2 years. He arrived 15 minutes late, refused to make eye contact, and spent the entire meal shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He finally admitted that his wife, who sang in the choir at my mother megachurch, had strongly advised him to reconsider our business relationship. He tried to frame it as a temporary pause due to corporate restructuring, but I saw the judgment in his eyes. He believed the narrative my mother had spun. He believed I was mentally unstable and toxic. I paid the bill, thanked him for his past services, and immediately instructed my procurement team to terminate his contract. Despite my outward display of strength, the psychological toll of the isolation began to bleed into my quiet moments. That evening, I found myself sitting on the floor of my home office, holding a framed photograph from my high school graduation. In the picture, I was smiling brightly, holding my diploma, while my mother stood stiffly beside me, her eyes tracking something off camera. It was the only photograph of us together that I had kept. I stared at her face and allowed the heavy, crushing grief to wash over me. It was not just the grief of the current betrayal. It was the accumulated grief of a lifetime spent trying to earn the love of a woman who was fundamentally incapable of providing it. I mourned the mother I deserved but never received. I mourned the sisterhood Chloe and I could have shared if we had not been pitted against each other in a desperate competition for maternal approval. I let the tears fall hot and fast in the privacy of my locked office. I cried for the little girl who thought her good grades would finally make her mother proud. I cried for the teenager who took a back seat so her sister could shine. I cried because being the strong Black woman often meant carrying pain without ever setting the burden down. but I only gave myself exactly 1 hour to mourn. When the hour was up, I wiped my face, walked to the bathroom, and splashed freezing water over my skin. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and watched the deep, profound sadness slowly drain from my eyes. In its place, a cold, dark, and incredibly sharp resolve began to crystallize. The grief was gone, permanently replaced by an absolute chilling clarity. My mother and sister thought their coordinated isolation would break my spirit. They assumed that by cutting me off from the family, I would eventually crumble under the weight of loneliness and beg for their forgiveness. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the weapon they handed me. By isolating me, they had actually liberated me. When you are no longer bound by the expectations of family loyalty, you are no longer constrained by guilt. They had officially severed the social contract that required me to protect them. They had given me full, unadulterated permission to be absolutely ruthless. They drew the battle lines and declared me the enemy. I accepted the title gladly. Marcus returned home late that evening, his briefcase heavy with the final grand jury subpoenas. He found me sitting at the kitchen island, calmly reviewing the financial logs showing Preston routing numbers. Marcus placed his hands on my shoulders, sensing the massive internal shift that had occurred within me during the day. He did not ask if I was okay, because he knew the woman sitting before him no longer required comforting. He simply asked if I was ready to proceed. I looked up at my husband, feeling a surge of genuine love for the man who actually protected me. I told him I was more than ready. The isolation was no longer a punishment. It was a strategic advantage. I did not have to worry about collateral damage anymore because I no longer cared about the people standing in the blast radius. My mother wanted a villain to blame for her problems, and I was fully prepared to play the role she assigned me. But I would not be the crazy, jealous sister throwing a tantrum. I would be the calculated executioner destroying her fraudulent empire with surgical precision. Marcus unlocked his encrypted federal terminal while I booted up my primary workstation. The panoramic windows of the penthouse reflected the glow of 3 massive monitors as we transformed our dining table into a digital war room. I bypassed the standard consumer banking portals and directly accessed the institutional clearinghouse networks my company used to monitor financial transactions. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling the exact metadata from the $90,000 home equity loan my mother had illegally approved. I wanted to see every single microscopic digital fingerprint attached to that money. I traced the wire transfer from the originating bank to the receiving account registered under Preston Sterling Wealth Management. But I did not stop there. I instructed my algorithm to peel back the layers of the destination account. Criminals always assume that moving money across state lines creates an impenetrable maze, but they severely underestimate the power of predictive financial modeling. The $90,000 did not sit in Preston corporate account for more than 12 minutes. It was immediately fractured into 3 separate wire transfers and routed to a shell company registered in Delaware. I pulled the corporate filing for the Delaware entity and cross-referenced the registered agent. It was a dummy corporation completely devoid of any legitimate commercial footprint. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, his eyes tracking the cascading lines of data on my screen. He cross-referenced the shell company with the highly restricted federal databases he had authorized access to. What he found made my blood run absolutely cold. Preston was not paying a high-end floral designer. He was not securing a luxury ballroom or putting a deposit down on custom catering. The $90,000 stolen using my social security number was wired directly into the personal checking account of a prominent cardiovascular surgeon in Atlanta. I looked at Marcus, genuinely confused for a fraction of a second. I asked him why Preston was paying a cardiologist $90,000 right in the middle of planning a $350,000 wedding. Marcus pulled up a restricted dossier on his federal terminal and turned the screen toward me. Because Preston Sterling is not a wealth manager, Marcus stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He is a predator running a classic affinity fraud scheme. And that cardiologist is an early investor who was threatening to blow the whistle to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I stared at the federal documentation as the horrifying truth finally snapped into perfect focus. Preston did not manage elite portfolios for old money families in Connecticut. He had absolutely zero institutional backing. His entire operation was a remarkably vicious Ponzi scheme. He intentionally targeted affluent minority families in Atlanta, leveraging his white privilege and his fabricated Ivy League pedigree to project an aura of exclusive financial access. He convinced wealthy black doctors, lawyers, and business owners that he could grant them entry into restricted investment funds usually reserved for the billionaire class. It was a masterful manipulation of racial insecurity and social ambition. He was taking fresh capital from new investors and using it to pay fake dividends to his older clients, maintaining the illusion of massive financial returns. But the well had run completely dry. The federal records Marcus displayed painted a picture of absolute financial devastation. Preston Sterling was drowning in millions of dollars of toxic debt. His corporate accounts were overdrawn. His luxury cars were heavily financed leases facing imminent repossession. The expensive designer suits he wore to my mother church were purchased on maxed-out credit cards. He was entirely broke. The $90,000 my mother had stolen from me was an act of pure, desperate survival. The cardiologist had likely demanded his initial investment back, realizing the returns were completely fabricated. If Preston defaulted, the doctor would have reported him to the federal authorities, triggering a massive audit that would collapse the entire house of cards. My mother committed a felony to unknowingly save a con artist from federal prison. A sickening realization washed over me as I looked deeper into the data. Chloe, $350,000 wedding was a complete phantom. There was no money reserved for a Vera Wang gown or imported champagne. Preston was using my sister as a highly visible prop. He was marrying into the Jenkins family specifically to access my mother's massive network at the megachurch. Vivian Jenkins was the communications director for a congregation of over 10,000 wealthy, upwardly mobile black professionals. By marrying Chloe, Preston was positioning himself right at the center of his next massive victim pool. My mother thought she was elevating her family status by securing a white elite son-in-law, but she was actually serving her entire church community to a financial parasite on a silver platter. I felt a cold, dark satisfaction settle deep into my bones. The trap was perfectly laid, and they had walked right into the center of it with their eyes wide open. Marcus officially generated the grand jury subpoenas directly from his terminal, requesting the immediate freezing of every single asset connected to Preston Sterling and his dummy corporations. He requested the unsealing of the bank fraud indictments and coordinated with the Internal Revenue Service to add tax evasion to the growing list of federal charges. The federal machinery was now fully activated and completely unstoppable. We decided not to tip our hand. We would let them continue their ridiculous charade. We would let Chloe boast on social media about her high society wedding preparations. We would let my mother stand at the pulpit and ask for prayers regarding my supposed mental breakdown. We would let them continue spending phantom money they absolutely did not possess. The higher they climbed on their ladder of lies, the more devastating the impact would be when we finally shattered the rungs. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. They wanted to destroy my reputation to protect a wedding that was nothing more than a criminal staging ground. They chose a con artist over their own blood because they were blinded by an obsession with a fake image. The absolute worst day of their miserable lives was approaching rapidly. I was no longer the discarded daughter crying for acceptance. I was the architect of their total destruction, and I was going to make sure the entire city had a front row seat to the spectacular show. The week leading up to Chloe's bachelorette party was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My mother continued her campaign of social assassination, utilizing every connection she had to isolate me. My phone remained silent save for the automated updates from my legal and financial teams. The silence was not a punishment, though. It was a profound relief. The noise of their toxicity was finally gone, leaving me with the quiet space required to execute my plan. Chloe had booked the VIP section of The Vault, one of the most exclusive and notoriously overpriced nightclubs in Atlanta. It was a place designed specifically for people who wanted to be seen spending money they didn't have. I knew this because my firm handled the payment processing software for the club's corporate parent company. I had access to their reservation system, which is how I knew exactly what time the party started the guest list, and the fact that the initial deposit had been paid using a credit card registered to Preston Sterling Wealth Management. I arrived at the vault at 11 p.m., an hour after Chloe's party was scheduled to begin. I didn't dress in the typical club attire. I wore a sharp black tailored jumpsuit, the kind of outfit that commanded attention without needing to scream for it. The bouncer at the Velvet Rope recognized me immediately, having seen me during a corporate walkthrough months prior. He unclipped the rope without a word, bypassing the long line of people desperately trying to gain entry. I made my way through the pulsing bass and the chaotic sea of bodies toward the raised VIP section overlooking the dance floor. I spotted Chloe immediately. She was wearing a sparkling silver dress, a tiara, and a sash that proclaimed "Future Mrs. Sterling." She was holding a massive bottle of champagne surrounded by 6 bridesmaids who were equally dressed to the nines, screaming over the music and snapping selfies. They looked like a scene straight out of a reality television show, completely consumed by the illusion of their own status. I approached the velvet rope guarding their specific booth. The private security detail moved to intercept me, but I simply held up my hand, flashed a metallic black corporate card, and informed him I was adding to the tab for the Jenkins party. He nodded and stepped aside. As I walked into the booth, the shrieking laughter abruptly ceased. The bridesmaids' women I had known vaguely from high school and college stared at me in stunned silence. Chloe lowered her champagne bottle, her eyes widening in genuine shock. For a split second I saw fear, but it was quickly replaced by a sickening, triumphant smirk. She honestly believed I had cracked under the pressure of our mother's smear campaign. She thought I was there to surrender. Maya, Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, projecting loudly enough for her friends to hear. I didn't think you would show your face. Did Mom finally talk some sense into you? One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Tara, who had always been a desperate social climber, chimed in. It's so good you came to apologize, Maya. Chloe has been so stressed about the wedding budget since you decided to be difficult. We were just saying how you need to step up and support your sister. I didn't immediately respond. I looked around the booth, noting the 3 empty bottles of premium champagne, the expensive bottle service presentation, and the towering display of sparklers. It was a visual representation of financial ruin, all funded by stolen money. I am not here to apologize, Tara, I said, my voice perfectly steady, cutting through the heavy bass of the club. And I certainly didn't come to a nightclub to be lectured about family duty by a woman who is still paying off her 2018 Honda Civic. Tara's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. The other bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances. Chloe's smirk vanished, replaced by an angry scowl. Then why are you here, Maya? Chloe demanded, crossing her arms. If you aren't going to hand over a check, you need to leave. This is my night, and I am not letting your toxic, jealous energy ruin it. I am marrying into an elite family, and I will not let you drag me down. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my corporate credit card, holding it between my fingers. I looked at the table, calculating the cost of the bottles they had already consumed. I am actually here to buy you a drink, Chloe, I said smoothly. A wedding gift, since I won't be attending the ceremony. Chloe eyed the black card. The sheer greed in her eyes was unmistakable. She was trapped between her desire to maintain her righteous anger and her desperate need to consume more free luxury. The greed, as it always did with my family, won out immediately. Well, she scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. It's the least you can do after the stress you've caused. I'll take another bottle of the Dom Perignon, the vintage one. I signaled to the VIP host who had been hovering nervously nearby. He approached the table with professional discretion. I would like to close out the tab for this entire section, I instructed him, handing over the black card. Please include the vintage bottle the bride requested and add a 20% gratuity. The host nodded, taking the card. Right away, Ms. Jenkins. The bridesmaids immediately relaxed their faces, breaking out into relieved smiles. Tara even had the audacity to raise her glass toward me. See, Maya? Was that so hard? It feels good to support your family, doesn't it? I smiled back, a cold, empty expression. Oh, you have absolutely no idea. The host returned a few minutes later carrying a leather folio containing the final receipt. The total was staggering, well over $15,000 for a few hours of aggressive performative drinking. He handed the folio to me, but I didn't take the pen. Actually, I said to the host, keeping my eyes locked on Chloe, "I need the bride to sign the receipt." Chloe looked confused. "Why do I need to sign it if you are paying?" I picked up the pen and offered it to her. "Because it's a corporate expense," I lied seamlessly. "My accounting department requires the beneficiary to sign off on large entertainment expenditures for tax purposes. Just sign your name at the bottom to verify you received the goods." Chloe rolled her eyes, eager to get back to her party and the fresh bottle of champagne the server was currently opening. Whatever, Maya. Always making things complicated. She snatched the pen from my hand, grabbed the receipt, and hastily scrawled her signature across the bottom line. She didn't read the itemized breakdown. She didn't look at the corporate billing details. She just wanted the transaction to be over so she could resume her fake life. She thrust the leather folio back at me. "There. Are we done now? Can you leave?" I took the folio, securing the signed receipt safely inside my blazer pocket. I looked at my sister, watching her raise her glass to toast with her friends, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just signed her own financial death warrant. "Enjoy the champagne, Chloe," I said softly. "It's going to be a very long time before you taste it again." I turned and walked away from the booth, navigating through the crowded club and out into the humid Atlanta night. The air felt cleaner outside. I pulled the receipt from my pocket, examining Chloe's rushed signature. The receipt clearly stated that the payment was processed on behalf of the Preston Sterling Wealth Management corporate account, covering an outstanding balance that had been flagged for non-payment. Chloe had just legally acknowledged her connection to the fraudulent funds, explicitly linking herself to the very account the FBI was actively investigating. She thought she was signing for free alcohol. In reality, she had just provided Marcus with the final piece of documentary evidence required to secure her indictment for conspiracy. I stepped into the cool night air, the heavy bass of the nightclub fading behind the thick velvet doors. The signed receipt burned a hole in my pocket, a quiet but lethal weapon, forged by Chloe's own insatiable vanity. I slid into the driver's seat of my SUV, the ambient lighting activating as the doors locked automatically. I did not immediately start the engine. Instead, I carefully unfolded the leather folio and smoothed out the carbon copy of the receipt. There it was, written in her loopy, practiced handwriting, a signature she had spent hours perfecting for her future life as Mrs. Sterling. She had officially signed as an authorized agent receiving goods funded by Preston Sterling Wealth Management. I opened the secure compartment in my center console, retrieved a high-resolution mobile scanner, and fed the receipt through the device. The proprietary software my company developed instantly encrypted the image, converting it into a secure data packet. I tapped the screen, routing it directly to Marcus's classified federal server. The transmission progress bar flashed across my dashboard, hitting 100% in less than 3 seconds. I sent a simple one-word text message to my husband. Secured. His reply came almost instantly. "The grand jury will love this. Get home safe." The legal trap was now irrevocably snapped shut. Before tonight, Chloe could have easily played the role of the oblivious, innocent bride. She could have stood before a federal judge, weeping perfectly timed tears, claiming she had absolutely no knowledge of Preston's financial crimes or the $90,000 fraudulent loan my mother had stolen. The justice system often grants leniency to the spouses of white-collar criminals if they can maintain plausible deniability. But that defense was completely obliterated the second the ink dried on that nightclub receipt. By signing a corporate expenditure document tied directly to Preston's fraudulent accounts, Chloe legally transitioned from an ignorant bystander into a documented participant. She had consumed $15,000 of stolen capital and verified it with her own hand. The following morning, the federal machinery began to move with terrifying speed. I sat in my midtown office sipping black coffee while Marcus updated me over an encrypted channel. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service, had formally joined forces, combining the wire fraud investigation with massive tax evasion charges. The receipt I provided was the final piece of the puzzle connecting the personal spending to the corporate theft. Marcus explained that the financial forensics team had successfully traced the remaining funds from the Ponzi scheme. Preston was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate, frantically moving money between dummy corporations in Delaware to avoid triggering automated banking alerts. While the federal agents drafted the sealed indictments, my mother and sister continued their delusional victory lap across Atlanta. Chloe posted a barrage of videos from the bachelorette party, flaunting the vintage champagne and the VIP booth. Her captions bragged about being blessed and highly favored, subtly hinting that her wealthy fiancé spared no expense for her happiness. My mother shared the post to her church congregation network, amplifying the illusion of their flawless, wealthy lifestyle. They were completely intoxicated by the social media validation, entirely unaware that federal investigators were currently archiving every single post, video, and timestamp as evidence of their lavish spending using stolen funds. By noon, the atmosphere shifted drastically. The illusion cracked. Preston Sterling sat in his rented faux luxury office, attempting to reconcile his rapidly collapsing accounts. He logged into his corporate banking portal, desperately trying to manipulate the ledger before his early investors noticed the missing dividends. According to the digital tripwires my team had embedded in the routing numbers, Preston discovered the $15,000 nightclub charge that had bypassed his usual fraud protections. The payment had been forced through the system and verified by a physical signature. I knew exactly how that conversation played out because Chloe could not resist bragging. My sister, still nursing a severe champagne hangover, called our mother to gloat about how she had utterly humiliated me at the club. She proudly recounted how she forced me to pay the massive bill and slink away in defeat. My mother, desperate to maintain her narrative of absolute dominance, praised Chloe for putting me in my place. But when Chloe gleefully mentioned signing the corporate receipt to finalize the transaction, the entire dynamic shattered. Preston understood the legal implications of that signature immediately. He was a con artist, and con artists survive by maintaining strict boundaries between their stolen money and their personal liabilities. He knew that Chloe signing a corporate document linked to his flagged accounts created a direct, undeniable paper trail to the very fraud he was trying to conceal. His meticulously crafted plan to use the Jenkins family as a shield had just been flipped into a massive federal liability. He realized that I had not paid that bill out of guilt or submission. I had walked into that nightclub and executed a highly sophisticated financial sting operation right under their noses. The panic Preston felt must have been absolute. He had assumed I was just a bitter, estranged sister who could be bullied into silence by my mother's aggressive social smear campaign. He had relied on the assumption that my desire to protect my public image would prevent me from involving the authorities. He fundamentally miscalculated my willingness to let the entire family structure burn. The realization that I was actively weaponizing corporate financial protocols to trap him sent him into a frantic, desperate rage. He could no longer hide behind my mother's skirts or use Chloe as a distraction. He had to deal with me directly. My security software alerted me that his IP address was aggressively attempting to probe my company's public-facing firewalls, searching for any vulnerability or weakness he could exploit. It was the desperate, flailing behavior of a trapped animal, realizing the cage had just been locked. He was entirely out of options, out of money, and rapidly running out of time. The sealed indictment was finalized. The warrants were being printed, and Preston had absolutely no idea that his aggressive attempt to intimidate me would only accelerate his spectacular downfall. As Preston Sterling frantically attempted to cover his digital tracks, his efforts only served to highlight the sheer magnitude of his financial incompetence. The federal machinery, operating with silent, devastating efficiency, was already light years ahead of him. In a secured situation room located deep within the FBI field office in Atlanta, Marcus stood before an array of high-resolution monitors. His task force, a hand-picked team of forensic accountants, cybercrime specialists, and seasoned field agents had been working around the clock since I handed over the initial server logs. The data I provided acted as the Rosetta Stone decrypting Preston's entire operation. The $90,000 loan fraudulently secured under my identity was the catalyst that brought the entire Ponzi scheme crashing down. The federal agents quickly traced the intricate web of wire transfers, exposing how Preston systematically siphoned capital from his affluent investors to sustain his fabricated lifestyle. The evidence was irrefutable. We established a clear, unbroken chain of custody for every stolen dollar from the moment my mother forged my signature to the instant the funds were routed through Delaware shell companies and finally deposited into the personal accounts of his increasingly agitated early investors. Marcus methodically outlined the charges, building an impenetrable wall of prosecution. The wire fraud and identity theft charges were the bedrock, carrying significant mandatory minimum sentences. The money laundering charges added a layer of complexity that would effectively paralyze Preston's legal defense. But it was the tax evasion that truly sealed his fate. The IRS agents, attached to the task force, uncovered years of falsified tax returns, revealing that Preston had not paid a single dime in federal taxes on his illicit gains. The scope of his criminality was staggering, a testament to his profound arrogance and his unwavering belief that his white privilege rendered him immune to scrutiny. My contribution to the investigation was critical. I worked alongside the cybercrime specialists, providing the proprietary network analysis tools my company developed. We mapped out Preston's digital footprint with surgical precision, identifying every fake email account, every burner phone, and every encrypted messaging app he used to communicate with his victims. The $15,000 nightclub receipt signed by my sister Chloe was the final piece of the puzzle. It established a direct link between the stolen funds and the lavish lifestyle Preston was funding, effectively destroying any potential defense that the money was used for legitimate business purposes. The speed and efficiency of the investigation were unprecedented. In a matter of days, Marcus and his team had assembled a mountain of evidence that would typically take months to compile. The case was airtight, a prosecutorial masterpiece designed to leave Preston with absolutely no avenue of escape. The U.S. Attorney's Office recognized the severity of the crimes and the potential flight risk, authorizing Marcus to present the case to a federal grand jury immediately. The grand jury proceedings were conducted under a shroud of absolute secrecy. Marcus presented the evidence with cold, calculating precision, laying out the timeline of the fraud, the identity theft, and the systematic exploitation of the investors. The financial logs, the intercepted communications, and the nightclub receipt were all entered into the record, weaving a narrative of undeniable guilt. The grand jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a sealed indictment charging Preston Sterling with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and tax evasion. The indictment was the legal equivalent of a death sentence. It authorized the immediate freezing of all assets connected to Preston and his dummy corporations. It granted the FBI the authority to execute search warrants on his office, his residence, and any other property linked to his criminal enterprise. The trap, which had been meticulously constructed over the past week, was now fully armed and ready to spring. While the federal agents prepared for the impending raids, my family remained blissfully unaware of the catastrophic storm that was about to engulf them. My mother continued to orchestrate the final details of Chloe's wedding, completely consumed by the illusion of her impending social triumph. She finalized the seating charts, confirmed the floral arrangements, and preened in front of her mega-church congregation, basking in the glow of her fabricated success. She had successfully isolated me, convinced that her smear campaign had neutralized any threat I posed to her carefully curated narrative. Chloe, equally delusional, spent her days posting endless streams of wedding-related content on her social media platforms. She paraded her engagement ring, gushed about her upcoming honeymoon, and reveled in the adoration of her followers. She genuinely believed she was about to step into a life of unimaginable wealth and privilege, completely oblivious to the fact that her future husband was facing decades in federal prison. The sheer scale of their vanity was staggering, a testament to their profound superficiality and their desperate need for external validation. I watched their public performance with a cold, detached satisfaction. They had chosen to align themselves with a criminal, prioritizing a fake image over their own family. They had actively participated in a conspiracy to steal my identity and ruin my reputation. They had earned every ounce of the devastation that was about to rain down upon them. The rehearsal dinner scheduled for Friday evening was the designated target. It was the perfect opportunity to expose Preston in front of the very people he had spent years attempting to impress. It was the moment when the illusion would be shattered and the harsh reality of his crimes would be laid bare for the entire world to see. Marcus and I finalized the operational details, ensuring that the execution of the warrants would be swift, decisive, and entirely public. We were not going to allow Preston the dignity of a quiet surrender. We were going to dismantle his fraudulent empire with maximum prejudice, and we were going to make sure that my mother and sister had a front row seat to the spectacle. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom of the Piedmont Driving Club was suffocatingly opulent. It was Friday evening, the night of the rehearsal dinner, and my mother had spared absolutely no expense. Or rather, she had spared none of the $90,000 she stole from me. The room was dripping in white orchids, gold-leafed centerpieces, and the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume. This was Vivian Jenkins, in her absolute prime, holding court, among the upper echelon of Atlanta black elite. Deacons from the mega-church, prominent local politicians, and a sea of women wearing her sorority colors mingled around the open bar, drinking top-shelf champagne on Preston fraudulent dime. Chloe was floating through the room in a silk cocktail dress, clinging to Preston's arm. Preston wore a velvet dinner jacket, looking every bit the wealthy aristocrat he pretended to be. My mother was standing near the grand piano, holding a crystal flute and basking in the endless stream of compliments from her peers. She was selling the ultimate illusion of black excellence, completely blind to the fact that her entire kingdom was built on federal wire fraud and an impending criminal indictment. I did not receive an invitation to the rehearsal dinner, but I did not need one. The staff at the club knew me from various corporate galas my firm had sponsored, and they simply opened the heavy oak doors when I approached. I walked into the ballroom wearing a tailored emerald green suit, my posture projecting the kind of absolute authority my mother had spent her entire life trying to fake. The moment I crossed the threshold, the ambient noise in the room began to drop. The string quartet continued playing, but the conversations closest to the doors abruptly halted. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd of church elders and socialites. They had all heard my mother's vicious smear campaign. They all believed I was having a mental breakdown, consumed by bitter jealousy over my sister fairy tale romance. They expected a disheveled, unhinged woman ready to cause a scene. Instead, they saw a completely composed tech executive who looked like she owned the building. My mother spotted me from across the room. Her smile froze. The glass in her hand trembled slightly, sloshing champagne onto her wrist, but she quickly recovered, plastering on a mask of condescending maternal concern. She excused herself from the church elders and marched directly toward me, her eyes flashing with a desperate, frantic anger. She grabbed my elbow, attempting to steer me forcefully toward a secluded alcove near the coat check. I let her guide me out of earshot of the main crowd, perfectly willing to have this final conversation in private. "What are you doing here, Maya?" My mother hissed, her voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You are not welcome. You have caused enough embarrassment for one lifetime. Leave before I have security physically throw you out." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely no emotional attachment. "I am here to give you one final opportunity to save yourself, Mom." I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing her to lean in close to hear me. "You are currently hosting a party funded by a federal crime. Preston is not a wealth manager. He is a predator running a Ponzi scheme, and his accounts are bleeding dry. The money you stole using my social security number was immediately used to pay off a disgruntled investor. There is no wedding budget. There is only a criminal enterprise, and you just signed yourself up as an accessory." My mother rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the small alcove. "Is this your grand plan? You crashed the rehearsal dinner to spin more of your pathetic, jealous delusions. I told the pastor you were losing your mind, and this just proves it. Preston comes from incredible wealth. His family is flying in tomorrow morning. You are just terrified that Chloe is marrying into a status you could never achieve with your little computer business. I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice. I leaned closer, my tone dropping to a dead, icy whisper. I am giving you a 48-hour ultimatum. You are going to stand up in front of this room tonight, confess to the identity theft, and cancel this fraudulent wedding. Then you are going to march into the bank on Monday morning and initiate a reversal of the $90,000 loan. If you do this, I will not pursue civil action against you. If you refuse, you will face the absolute fire of the federal government. The choice is entirely yours. My mother stared at me for a long moment. I watched her mind process the threat. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of doubt behind her eyes. But her vanity was a terminal disease. The thought of admitting failure, of standing in front of her sorority sisters and church elders to confess that she was broke and her future son-in-law was a con artist, was a fate worse than death to her. She could not surrender the illusion. She needed the facade more than she needed her freedom. She threw her head back and laughed right in my face. It was a cruel, dismissive sound dripping with absolute arrogance. You are out of your mind, Maya. You think you can waltz in here and command me. You think I am going to cancel the social event of the decade because you are throwing a jealous tantrum over a loan you can easily afford. You have absolutely no power here. Tomorrow, Chloe will become a sterling. We will cement our legacy in this city, and you will go back to your lonely apartment. Do your worst, Maya. No one will ever believe a bitter daughter over a respected church leader. I simply smiled and walked away. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the St. Regis Atlanta, illuminating a scene of absolute chaotic vanity. The room was a whirlwind of silk robes, spilled champagne, and overflowing garment bags. A small army of makeup artists and hairstylists fluttered around the bridal party, wielding curling irons and contour brushes like magic wands. At the center of this fabricated tornado sat my sister Chloe, completely consumed by her own reflection in an oversized gilded mirror. She was drinking mimosas out of a crystal flute, completely oblivious to the fact that every single drop of liquor, every makeup brush stroke, and the very suite they were sitting in was funded by federal bank fraud. Chloe held up her left hand, admiring the massive diamond engagement ring that Preston had given her. It caught the morning light, scattering fractured rainbows across the suite walls. I knew, thanks to Marcus and his forensic accountants, that the diamond was a high-grade cubic zirconia, set in cheap platinum, purchased with funds siphoned from a retired school teacher's drained retirement account. But Chloe believed it was a priceless heirloom. She believed she was ascending to the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta's social hierarchy. She turned her hand this way and that, entirely intoxicated by the illusion of her impending wealth. Tara, the same bridesmaid from the nightclub, leaned over Chloe's shoulder, practically drooling over the fake diamond. You are so incredibly lucky, Chloe. Preston is basically royalty. You are going to be living in a Connecticut mansion by next year, while the rest of us are still stuck fighting traffic on the interstate. Chloe giggled, a sharp, grating sound that echoed her profound superficiality. I know, right? It just goes to show that if you maintain your standards and refuse to settle, the universe rewards you. I am officially stepping into a completely different tax bracket today. I just wish Maya could have overcome her bitter jealousy long enough to witness this. It is truly sad how some people let their own failures blind them to their family's blessings. Her absolute delusion was staggering. She was hours away from having her entire life dismantled by the United States Department of Justice, yet she sat there pitying me for my supposed failures. While Chloe basked in the adoration of her sycophantic bridesmaids, my mother was busy orchestrating her own public relations masterpiece in the adjoining lounge area. Vivian Jenkins had hired a premium wedding videography team, instructing them to capture what she termed the genesis of a dynasty. She stood in front of a cascading wall of imported white roses, wearing a custom-tailored mother-of-the-bride gown that shimmered with hand-sewn pearls. She was practically vibrating with arrogant satisfaction as she spoke directly into the camera lens, projecting the ultimate facade of a high society matriarch. Today is not just a wedding, my mother proclaimed, her voice adopting that rhythmic preaching cadence she utilized at the megachurch. Today is a celebration of Black excellence and generational wealth. We are witnessing the merging of two elite families. We are setting a standard for what it means to elevate our community and build a legacy that will last for decades. My daughter Chloe is marrying a man of exceptional character and profound financial acumen. This event is a testament to the fact that when you walk in faith and demand the absolute best for your children, the Lord provides abundantly. She paused to dab a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief, ensuring the camera captured her fabricated maternal emotion. She was preaching about faith and legacy while standing in a room paid for by identity theft. She was boasting about generational wealth using the exact $90,000 she had stolen from her own daughter's credit profile. The psychological dissonance required to deliver that speech with a straight face was terrifying. She truly believed her own lies. She believed that as long as the optics were flawless, the underlying reality simply did not matter. A knock at the double doors of the suite interrupted her monologue. A hotel concierge entered, carrying a massive velvet box tied with a thick silver ribbon. A gift for the bride, the concierge announced, from Mr. Preston Sterling. Chloe squealed in delight, practically shoving her makeup artist out of the way to reach the box. The videographer quickly repositioned his camera to capture the moment. My mother clapped her hands together, radiating triumphant glee. Chloe untied the ribbon and flipped open the lid. Inside lay a sprawling, intricately designed diamond necklace that looked like it belonged in a royal treasury. A small, heavy card rested on top. Chloe read it aloud for the camera, her voice dripping with artificial emotion. To my beautiful bride. A small token to match your radiance. I cannot wait to give you the world. Love, Preston. The bridesmaids erupted into a chorus of jealous shrieks. My mother beamed, turning back to the camera lens to offer a smug, knowing smile. That is how a real man treats his bride, she declared proudly. What none of those women knew was that the necklace was completely worthless. It was a sophisticated piece of costume jewelry Preston had likely procured to maintain the charade until the wedding was finalized. He was entirely broke, his accounts frozen by federal mandate just hours prior, yet he was still aggressively playing the role of the billionaire groom. He was matching their vanity with his own desperate deceit, a predator keeping his prey pacified until the trap fully closed. The final hour of preparation was a blur of frantic arrogance. Chloe stepped into the $25,000 Vera Wang gown, the luxurious fabric rustling as the bridesmaids carefully zipped up the back. She stared at herself in the full-length mirror, tears of pure vanity welling in her eyes. She looked like a princess stepping out of a fairy tale, blissfully ignoring the scent of smoke filtering under the door. My mother stood behind her, resting her hands on Chloe's shoulders, their reflections merging in the glass. "You are flawless," my mother whispered, her voice thick with pride. "You have secured everything we ever dreamed of. Let us go show the world who the Jenkins family truly is." They gathered their bouquets, smoothed their designer gowns, and walked out of the presidential suite with their heads held impossibly high. They strutted down the hotel corridors like conquering royalty, completely intoxicated by their own fabricated prestige. They climbed into the waiting fleet of stretch limousines, ready to make their grand entrance at the cathedral. They were driving straight toward their own spectacular destruction, totally blind to the fact that the federal government was already waiting for them at the altar. As the limousine doors closed, sealing them inside their plush leather-lined fantasy, Chloe took one last look at her phone, scoffing at the empty screen. "Not even a text from Maya," she muttered, rolling her eyes. "She is probably sitting in her penthouse right now, crying over what she is missing out on." My mother simply patted her hand, her diamond bracelets clinking softly. "Do not let her bitter energy ruin your perfect moment, Chloe. Today, she does not even exist to us." And with that final arrogant dismissal, The motorcade pulled away from the curb, carrying them effortlessly toward the absolute worst day of their miserable lives, the Cathedral of Christ. The king stood as a monument to high society, but today it was nothing more than a decorated crime scene. I slipped into the upper balcony long before the luxury vehicles arrived. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the $350,000 illusion my mother had orchestrated. The sheer scale of the fraud was laid bare. Thousands of imported white hydrangeas and Juliet roses lined the center aisle. The floral budget was enough to put a down payment on a house, yet it was funded by the stolen $90,000 loan and drained retirement accounts of Preston's victims. The heavy scent of blossoms masked the stench of the impending federal indictments, creating an atmosphere that matched the toxic vanity of my family. Down below, the heavy wooden doors remained open as the elite of Atlanta society filed into the pews. This was the exact audience my mother sacrificed my identity to impress. I watched as prominent local politicians, wealthy developers, and senior deacons from her megachurch took their seats. The women wore extravagant hats and silk dresses, whispering about the sheer opulence of the event. They were intoxicated by the facade of black excellence my mother was projecting. They believed they were witnessing the ultimate merger of a prominent family with old Wall Street money. Every single guest was an unwitting extra in a theatrical production financed by a collapsing Ponzi scheme. My mother, Vivian Jenkins, sat in the first pew, occupying the seat of honor like a reigning queen. She wore a tailored silver gown that caught the light from the massive crystal chandeliers above. I watched her lean over to whisper smugly to the church elders, sitting beside her, radiating absolute arrogance. She had successfully isolated her difficult daughter, secured a wealthy white son-in-law, and cemented her legacy in the upper echelons of Atlanta high society. She patted her perfect hair, entirely blind to the invisible catastrophic ticking clock counting down right above her head. At the front of the cathedral, standing confidently at the marble altar, was Preston Sterling. He wore a bespoke white tuxedo jacket, looking every inch the elite financial prodigy he claimed to be. He flashed a practiced smile at the crowd, shaking hands with the groomsmen. He looked incredibly calm, so perfectly at ease. He genuinely thought he had gotten away with it all. He believed the fraudulent loan had successfully plugged the holes in his criminal enterprise long enough to secure his position within my mother's congregation. He was already calculating how many affluent doctors he could convince to invest in his fake funds. He thought he was the smartest man in the room, unaware that federal agents were locking down the perimeter. The roar of polite conversation ceased as the 30-piece string orchestra began playing a sweeping classical arrangement. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the church swung shut, only to reopen moments later to reveal the bridal party. Tara and the other bridesmaids marched slowly down the aisle in their custom silver gowns, clutching tight bouquets of white orchids. They played their parts flawlessly, projecting the image of a loyal, high-status entourage. They took their places at the altar, beaming with manufactured joy, completely oblivious that their signed receipts from the nightclub were currently sitting in an evidence locker at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Then the music swelled into a triumphant crescendo. The congregation collectively rose to their feet. Chloe appeared in the doorway, framed by the bright afternoon light filtering through the stained glass windows. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, feeding her insatiable vanity perfectly. She walked down the aisle, radiating pure delusion. The $25,000 Vera Wang gown trailed heavily behind her, a breathtaking sea of imported lace and French silk. The fake diamond necklace Preston had given her glittered under the cathedral lights, a worthless piece of costume jewelry masquerading as a royal heirloom. She looked directly at Preston, her eyes shining with tears of absolute triumph. She was entirely convinced she was stepping into a lifetime of unimaginable wealth and privilege, blissfully ignoring the reality that her groom was an entirely broke con artist facing decades behind bars. The pastor, the very same man who had lectured me over the phone about my unchristian heart and lack of family duty, stepped up to the massive gold microphone. He raised his hands high into the air, gesturing for the eager crowd to take their seats. He welcomed the congregation, speaking passionately about the holy union of two prominent families, about the beautiful merging of different backgrounds, bound together by faith and prosperity. The sheer hypocrisy of his sermon was absolutely nauseating to witness. He was blessing a criminal conspiracy standing on an altar paid for by stolen money and preaching about truth while presiding over a massive, glittering lie. I stood motionless in the darkened balcony, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the spectacular spectacle unfold with cold, detached precision. My personal cell phone vibrated silently against my side, signaling the impending storm. I slipped it out of my tailored blazer pocket and glanced down at the glowing screen. It was a single, highly anticipated text message from Marcus. The heavy wooden cathedral doors are locked and fully secured. Our federal tactical teams are officially moving in now. I looked back down at the altar just as Preston gently took Chloe by the hands. The pastor closed his eyes and asked the massive congregation to bow their heads in a moment of silent prayer. The absolute silence in the cathedral was suffocating, and absolute incredibly heavy with the profound weight of hundreds of people buying into a massive glittering fraud. The carefully constructed illusion was entirely flawless. It was wonderfully, brilliantly perfect in every single detail. And it was about to be completely and violently obliterated in front of the entire city. The pastor lowered his hands and opened his eyes, ready to deliver the opening remarks of the ceremony. He took a deep breath, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this esteemed congregation to join Chloe Jenkins and Preston Sterling in holy matrimony. The words hung in the pristine air, echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the cathedral. Chloe beamed, tightening her grip on Preston's hands. Preston offered a slight, practiced nod. It was the absolute pinnacle of their fabricated reality. The resounding crash of the solid oak doors at the rear of the cathedral slamming violently against the stone walls shattered the sacred silence. The impact was deafening, echoing like a thunderclap through the cavernous space. The pastor stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The congregation turned as one massive synchronized wave of silk and tailored suits, their collective gasp sucking the oxygen out of the room. I leaned against the polished wooden railing of the balcony, my eyes fixed entirely on the main entrance. They did not walk in quietly. A dozen federal agents stormed across the threshold, their heavy tactical boots thudding against the imported marble floors. They wore dark windbreakers with stark yellow lettering spelling out FBI and IRS across their backs. The visual contrast was incredibly jarring. These were not polite guests arriving late. They were a highly coordinated, heavily armed strike team moving with absolute terrifying purpose. They fanned out immediately, securing all the exits and blocking the main aisles. The sheer presence of federal law enforcement invading the most exclusive social event of the year was a spectacle of unparalleled destruction. The string quartet seated near the altar completely panicked. The lead violinist jerked her bow across the strings, producing a sharp, agonizing screech that sliced through the rising tension. The music died instantly. In its absence, the chaotic murmur of 300 high-profile guests erupted into a deafening roar of frantic whispers. Deacons clutched their Bibles. Socialites grasped their pearls. The elite members of Atlanta society, the very people my mother had sacrificed my identity to impress, were now trapped inside a rapidly escalating federal raid. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern face and a clipped badge on his belt, marched directly down the center aisle. He bypassed the imported white hydrangeas and the lavish floral arrangements without a single glance. Two armed agents flanked him, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They were walking straight toward the altar, their eyes locked entirely on the groom. I watched Preston from my elevated vantage point. The arrogant, untouchable Wall Street facade evaporated in less than 3 seconds. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the cathedral spotlights. He took a small, involuntary step backward, his polished leather shoes scraping loudly against the marble steps of the altar. His eyes darted toward the side doors, looking for a potential escape route, but 2 IRS agents were already blocking the archway. The realization struck him with the force of a freight train. He knew exactly why they were there. He knew his Ponzi scheme had finally collapsed. He dropped Chloe's hands as if they were suddenly on fire. Chloe remained completely frozen, entirely unable to process the absolute violation of her perfect aesthetic. She looked from the heavily armed federal agents, marching toward her, to Preston, who was now backing away from her. "Excuse me," Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the microphone clipped to the pastor's lapel. "You cannot be in here. This is a private event. You are ruining my wedding video." She genuinely believed she could scold federal law enforcement for interrupting her photo opportunities. Her profound mind, boggling vanity shielded her from the terrifying reality unfolding right in front of her. Down in the front pew, my mother finally snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. Vivian Jenkins leaped to her feet, her silver designer gown swishing loudly. She stepped directly into the center aisle, attempting to use her body to block the lead agent's path. She raised her hand, projecting the authoritative, commanding tone she used to run her church committees. "Stop right there!" my mother demanded, her voice shaking with desperate, frantic rage. "I am the communications director for this church. Do you have any idea who is sitting in these pews? You are making a massive mistake. You are going to leave this sanctuary immediately, or I will have the mayor on the phone in 2 minutes." The lead agent did not even break his stride. He stepped neatly around my mother as if she were nothing more than a minor obstacle, completely ignoring her threats. He did not care about her social standing, her church position, or her supposed political connections. Federal agents do not negotiate with the mothers of fraudulent brides. "Step aside, ma'am," the agent commanded, his voice projecting a lethal, uncompromising authority that easily overpowered the murmurs of the crowd. He continued his march up the marble steps of the altar, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. The guests who had invested with Preston began to put the pieces together. I could see the dawning horror on the faces of the doctors and lawyers seated in the premium sections. They were watching their trusted wealth manager retreat from federal investigators like a cornered animal. The whispers escalated into outright shouts of confusion and anger. Some guests instinctively pulled out their phones, recording the catastrophic collapse of the Jenkins family legacy in real time. My mother spun around, grasping at the air, watching helplessly as the tactical agents completely surrounded the altar. The magnificent facade she had built using my stolen identity was tearing apart at the seams, leaving her completely exposed to the judgment of the entire city. It was the absolute end of their glamorous, glittering delusion. The lead agent reached the top of the altar steps and unfolded the document. "Preston Sterling," he announced, his voice carrying clearly over the panicked murmurs of the congregation. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and operating a fraudulent investment scheme." Preston raised his hands in a frantic, desperate gesture of surrender. "There has been a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You have the wrong man. I run a legitimate wealth management firm. I have investors sitting right here in this room." The agent did not flinch. "You have victims sitting right here in this room," he corrected sharply. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Preston hesitated, glancing wildly at the crowd, then at Chloe, who was staring at him with a look of absolute horror. He slowly turned around, submitting to the inevitable. The metallic click of the handcuffs, echoing in the sudden silence of the cathedral, sounded like a death knell for the illusion they had all so carefully maintained. The agent began reciting the Miranda warning, each word driving a nail into the coffin of Preston's fabricated life. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chloe finally broke. The paralyzing shock evaporated, replaced by a raw, hysterical scream that tore through the sanctuary. "No!" she shrieked, lunging toward Preston, her Vera Wang gown tangling around her legs. "You can't take him. We are getting married. This is my wedding." Two agents quickly stepped in to intercept her, their movements firm but restrained. "Ma'am, please step back," one of them instructed. "We are executing a federal warrant. Do not interfere with a federal investigation." Chloe struggled against them, her perfectly styled hair falling loose, tears of absolute devastation ruining her meticulous makeup. "This is Maya's fault," she wailed, her voice echoing shrilly. "She did this because she is jealous. She set him up. Preston, tell them you are innocent. Tell them." Preston, however, remained silent, his head bowed, his arrogant facade completely shattered. The reality of his situation had finally crushed his delusions of invincibility. While the chaos unfolded at the altar, two other agents moved swiftly down the center aisle, stopping at the fourth pew. They approached the three men who had posed as Preston's legal counsel during that disastrous dinner at the restaurant. The fake lawyers, realizing they had been identified, attempted a hasty retreat, but the agents had them cornered. They were swiftly detained and handcuffed, their cheap suits looking even more pathetic under the cathedral lights. The entire operation was a masterclass in coordinated federal enforcement. My mother Vivian stood frozen in the center aisle, watching the total collapse of her carefully curated world. Her face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. She had sacrificed her daughter's identity, her own integrity, and the very foundation of her family to secure this moment, and now it was dissolving into a public spectacle of criminal prosecution. The guests, the elite of Atlanta society, the prominent politicians and the senior deacons from her megachurch, were witnessing the complete unmasking of Vivian Jenkins. The whispers had turned into frantic conversations. People were texting, recording, and sharing the shocking events unfolding before them. The facade of black excellence she had so desperately tried to project had been exposed as a hollow, fraudulent shell. The lead agent finished reading Preston his rights and signaled to his team. "Let's move him out," he ordered. The agents flanked Preston, guiding him down the altar steps and back down the center aisle. The congregation parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from the disgraced groom, as if his criminality were contagious. As Preston was escorted past my mother, she finally found her voice. "Preston," she cried out, her tone a mixture of desperation and furious disbelief. "What is the meaning of this? Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you have the money." Preston didn't even look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, his entire being consumed by the devastating reality of his impending incarceration. He had used her vanity as a shield, and now that shield had crumbled, leaving them both exposed. The federal agents marched Preston and the fake lawyers out of the heavy oak doors, the sound of the handcuffs clinking against each other, serving as a grim soundtrack to their departure. The cathedral, once a beacon of high society elegance, now felt like a sterile, clinical crime scene. Chloe collapsed onto the altar steps, a heap of imported lace and shattered dreams. Her hysterical sobs echoed through the cavernous space, a stark contrast to the triumphant music that had played just moments before. The bridesmaids hovered nervously, unsure of how to comfort a bride whose groom had just been arrested for federal crimes. The illusion was gone, leaving only the devastating truth. The $350,000 wedding, the Vera Wang gown, the fake diamond necklace, it was all a lie, a magnificent glittering lie that had finally come crashing down. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the cathedral swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing the aftermath of the raid inside the sanctuary. I descended the winding staircase from the upper balcony, my emerald green suit brushing against the imported marble. The air was thick with the scent of white hydrangeas and sheer panic. I walked down the center aisle with the slow, measured pace of a woman who had just successfully amputated a toxic limb. I did not rush. I wanted to savor every single second of the absolute destruction they had brought upon themselves. Around me, the elite members of Atlanta society were scrambling for the exits. Deacons who had praised my mother, Faith, were now frantically whispering into their cell phones, desperately trying to distance their church from the exploding scandal. Socialites who had kissed Chloe cheeks just hours ago were practically sprinting toward the valet, parking terrified that the stench of federal fraud might cling to their designer gowns. Massive illusion of high society prestige was dissolving faster than smoke in a hurricane. As I reached the front of the cathedral, the financial reality of the federal indictments began to hit the vendors in real time. Marcus had coordinated the asset freeze to execute the precise moment the handcuffs clicked shut on Preston wrists. The head wedding planner, a woman known for organizing million-dollar events, stood near the altar, staring at her glowing tablet in absolute horror. She began making aggressive hand gestures to her assistants, pointing frantically at her screen. The catering manager, who had been preparing a lavish 6-course reception in the adjoining banquet hall, rushed into the sanctuary with his phone pressed tightly to his ear. The automated banking alerts had reached them simultaneously. Every single check, every wire transfer, every deposit linked to Preston's Sterling Wealth Management had just been officially flagged and reversed by the federal government. The money was gone. The wedding planner marched directly up to my mother. Her professional demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the ruthless panic of a business owner facing a massive financial loss. She loudly informed Vivian that the reception was immediately canceled. The vintage champagne would remain corked. The imported caviar would not be served, and the floral team was already pulling the elaborate centerpieces from the banquet tables to salvage their inventory. "You have 10 minutes to clear the property," the planner stated, her voice echoing sharply. "My staff is shutting down the venue. We are not working for free." My mother stood completely paralyzed as the wedding planner demanded immediate alternative payment. Vivian Jenkins, the woman who had sacrificed her own daughter's identity to impress a crowd of superficial socialites, was now being publicly humiliated by her own hired help. She frantically searched her designer clutch, her hands shaking violently. She had no money. She had drained her personal accounts to maintain the facade fully, relying on Preston, stolen funds to cover the final astronomical balances. Chloe was still collapsed on the altar steps, screaming incoherently about her ruined wedding video and her confiscated fake diamond. She was completely useless, a weeping puddle of imported lace and shattered delusions. My mother looked up, her panicked eyes darting across the rapidly emptying cathedral until they locked directly onto me. She saw me standing at the edge of the altar, perfectly composed, watching her kingdom burn down to the foundation. The realization hit her with staggering force. She looked at my calm expression and understood in that exact moment that I was the architect of this entire federal operation. I was the one who pulled the digital trigger. I was the one who guided the sword of the federal government straight to the heart of her fake empire. She stumbled toward me, practically tripping over the heavy hem of her custom silver mother of the bride dress. The arrogant, condescending matriarch was entirely gone. She was now just a desperate, broken woman, terrified of losing her prestigious social standing. She abandoned her haughty posture and scrambled forward, grasping at straws. "Maya," she gasped, grabbing my arm with trembling fingers. Her voice was thick with panic and disbelief. "Please, you have to fix this. The vendors are threatening to call the local police for theft of services. The entire church board is watching us. Everyone is leaving. You have your corporate card. You have the funds. Just swipe your card and pay them. We can save the reception. We can move everyone to the banquet hall and tell them it was a massive administrative misunderstanding. We can fix the narrative. Please, Maya, use your black card to save this family dignity. Do not let us be destroyed like this in front of the whole city." I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve. The sheer audacity of her request was breathtaking. After stealing my identity, ruining my credit, launching a vicious smear campaign across the entire city, and attempting to destroy my business, she still believed I existed solely to serve as her financial savior. She believed that the fear of public embarrassment would somehow compel me to fund the very criminal enterprise I had just helped dismantle. I slowly raised my eyes to meet her terrified gaze. I reached over and deliberately peeled her trembling fingers off my jacket. I did not raise my voice, but my words cut through the cavernous sanctuary like absolute ice. "There is no dignity left to save Mom. You destroyed your legacy the second you forged my signature. You traded your daughter for a fake diamond and a con artist because you were too weak to live in reality. You said $90,000 was pocket change to me. It truly is. But I would rather burn it than save a thief. I turned my back on her, leaving her standing completely alone in the ruins of her vanity. The ultimate illusion had entirely collapsed into dust, leaving nothing but truth. 30 days passed since the heavy cathedral doors slammed shut on the illusion of my family's prestige. Preston Sterling was currently trading his tailored velvet dinner jackets for standard-issue federal holding facility jumpsuits. Bail was immediately denied. Marcus ensured the presiding judge saw the extreme flight risk of a desperate con artist with access to offshore shell accounts. The harsh reality of his situation had finally crushed his arrogant white privilege. He was looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. His high-powered defense attorneys vanished the exact moment his assets were federally frozen, leaving him with an overworked public defender who advised him to take a plea deal he was still too proud to accept. The supposed financial prodigy was reduced to a sequential inmate number, permanently stripped of his fake pedigree, and left to rot in a concrete cell. Chloe's spectacular downfall was an absolute masterpiece of public humiliation. The federal government does not politely ask for stolen assets back. They simply take them with ruthless precision. I watched the local news coverage as federal marshals arrived at the sprawling rental mansion Chloe and Preston had used as their staging ground. They repossessed the silver Maserati directly from the circular driveway. They seized the counterfeit diamond ring right off her shaking finger, cataloging it as material evidence of the broader affinity fraud scheme. Every piece of designer clothing, every imported handbag, and every single luxury item purchased with the stolen $90,000 was systematically boxed up and carried out the front door. Chloe stood on the manicured lawn, weeping hysterically, in a pair of cheap sweatpants, watching her fabricated high society life being loaded into the back of a government transport truck. The physical seizure of her assets was absolutely nothing compared to her digital execution. Chloe had built her entire identity on social media validation, and the internet is fiercely ruthless to a fallen lifestyle influencer. The videos of her screaming at the cathedral altar while her groom was handcuffed went viral across every major platform within hours of the raid. Meme pages dissected her frantic, tear-streaked face with zero mercy. True crime podcasts dedicated entire episodes to the fake Wall Street billionaire and his oblivious, exceptionally vain bride. The comment sections on her previously curated posts turned into a bloodbath of mockery and derision. People ruthlessly mocked the fake diamond, the bounced catering checks, and her desperate attempts to project a lifestyle she never actually earned. When she attempted to post a tearful apology video claiming she was just an innocent victim manipulated by love, the backlash was so severe she was forced to permanently delete every single one of her accounts. Her social isolation was absolute and immediate. Tara and the rest of the sycophantic bridesmaids treated Chloe like she was carrying a highly contagious disease. The exact moment the federal investigators reached out to them regarding the $15,000 nightclub receipt, they completely turned on her to save themselves from prosecution. They publicly denounced her, claiming they had no idea she was funding their lavish parties with money stolen from vulnerable retirees and her own sister. Chloe was officially blacklisted from every exclusive restaurant, boutique, and social circle in Atlanta. She had traded her family for proximity to wealth, and when the wealth evaporated, she was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own profound vanity. But the most spectacular collapse belonged entirely to my mother. Vivian Jenkins had sacrificed my identity on the altar of her social ambition, and the resulting explosion scorched her entire kingdom to ash. The leadership board of the megachurch convened an emergency session the Monday following the wedding raid. Pastor Thomas, the very same man who had dared to lecture me over the phone about my supposedly unchristian heart, was the first to throw her under the advancing bus. The megachurch could not risk the horrific optics of employing a communications director deeply implicated in a federal financial scandal. They formally terminated her employment, immediately revoking her lucrative salary, her benefits, and her access to the massive congregation she had spent decades manipulating. They issued a sterile, carefully worded press release, stating the church was praying for the Jenkins family during this troubling time, which is the ultimate passive-aggressive dismissal in Southern religious circles. The elite sorority alumni group followed suit with swift and ruthless efficiency. The women who had previously drafted letters of censure demanding my compliance now initiated emergency expulsion proceedings against my mother. They stripped her of her membership, citing a gross violation of their ethical standards and a total failure to uphold the true principles of Black excellence. Vivienne was unceremoniously removed from every charity board, every country club committee, and every high-profile social registry in the city. Her phone, which used to ring incessantly with invitations to elite galas and networking luncheons, went completely dead. The wealthy women she had desperately tried to impress with Chloe's fake wedding now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. In exactly 30 days, the impenetrable fortress of status my mother and sister had constructed was reduced to a pile of smoldering rubble. They were entirely bankrupt, socially exiled, and facing intense federal scrutiny regarding their complicity in the loan fraud. They had to surrender their luxury leased vehicles and downsize into a cramped, nondescript apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, miles away from the glittering lights of Buckhead. They were forced to live in the exact reality they had spent their entire lives running from. They had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The $90,000 loan they stole from my identity had bought them nothing but a one-way ticket to absolute, undeniable ruin. I monitored the fallout from the quiet, secure sanctuary of my penthouse, feeling absolutely no pity, no regret, and no toxic guilt. I had simply held up a mirror to their corruption, and the reflection had shattered their world. The severe thunderstorm that battered Atlanta 2 weeks later felt like a poetic manifestation of the wrath I had unleashed upon my bloodline. The torrential rain washed the streets clean, flooding the gutters and keeping the city elite safely tucked away inside their dry, luxurious estates. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring a cup of dark roast coffee, when the advanced security system of my penthouse triggered a perimeter alert. The wall-mounted digital display illuminated, showing a high-definition live feed from the building's fortified main entrance. Standing on the marble steps, completely drenched by the driving rain, was Vivienne. She had managed to bypass the outer security gate by tailgating a delivery truck, a desperate maneuver from a woman who was entirely out of options. She looked absolutely pathetic. The expensive silk blowouts and flawless makeup that once defined her entire existence were completely ruined by the storm. She was shivering in a cheap raincoat, pressing the intercom button for my penthouse over and over again with frantic, trembling fingers. I did not immediately answer. I stood in my warm, quiet sanctuary, sipping my coffee, and watched the woman who had birthed me unravel on a digital screen. "Maya, please." Her voice crackled through the secure audio feed, barely audible over the roaring thunder. "I know you are up there. I know you can see me. Please answer the door." The desperation in her tone was raw and unfiltered. There was no arrogance left, no condescending maternal authority, and no fake church lady grace. She was a cornered animal. "Maya." "I have nothing left," she sobbed, pressing her face close to the camera lens. "The bank took the cars. The landlord is threatening to evict Chloe and me from the apartment because we cannot make the rent. Preston legal fees drained whatever we had hidden away. I cannot even show my face at the grocery store without people pointing and whispering. I lost my church. I lost my friends. I lost my entire life." She paused, gasping for air as the cold rain plastered her hair to her cheeks. She wiped her face and tried to summon the ultimate weapon she had relied on for 32 years: toxic family guilt. "You are my daughter Maya. We are blood. Blood is thicker than water. The Bible says to honor thy mother and father. You cannot just leave me out here to starve in the streets. You have millions of dollars sitting in your bank accounts. You just secured another massive federal contract. I saw it on the news. You have more money than you could ever spend. Just give me a fraction of it, just enough to get Chloe and me back on our feet. We are family, Maya. Family is supposed to forgive. You have made your point. You won. Now please let me come upstairs. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I reached out and pressed the biometric activation button on the intercom panel, opening the two-way audio channel. My voice carried no anger, no sorrow, and no pity. It was a perfectly calibrated instrument of absolute finality. You do not get to invoke the concept of family when you need a bailout, I said, my voice echoing sharply from the external speakers into the pouring rain. Family is an action, not a biological accident. Family protects each other. Family does not forge signatures to steal $90,000. Family does not launch a coordinated smear campaign across an entire city to label their daughter as mentally unstable. Family does not prioritize a fake, flashy wedding and a white con artist over their own flesh and blood. Vivienne flinched violently as if my words were physical blows. She pressed her hands against the wet glass of the lobby doors, weeping uncontrollably. Maya, I am your mother. I gave you life. Please. You chose Preston, I stated, cutting off her pathetic pleading with surgical precision. You chose the illusion of wealth. You chose a party over your daughter. You placed your bets on a fraud, and now you have lost the gamble. You wanted proximity to his imaginary elite status so desperately. Let his imaginary money pay your rent. Let Chloe Instagram followers buy your groceries. Let your elite sorority sisters feed you. Maya, no. I am begging you. This is the consequence of your vanity, I said, delivering the absolute final blow. You are completely dead to me. Do not ever return to this building. I released the intercom button and immediately tapped the security protocol on the touchscreen. I permanently blocked her facial recognition data from the building guest registry and flagged her profile for trespassing. The digital feed snapped black. The silence in my penthouse returned thick, peaceful, and utterly unbroken. The iron boundary was officially drawn, forged in fire, and sealed with absolute certainty. The heavy, oppressive rain of Atlanta dissolved, replaced by the brilliant, blinding sunshine of the Mediterranean. 6 months later, I was sitting on a private, sun-drenched terrace, carved into the dramatic cliffs of the Amalfi Coast. The turquoise water of the Tyrrhenian Sea stretched out endlessly before me, sparkling under the clear blue sky. Marcus walked out onto the terrace wearing crisp linen trousers and a relaxed white shirt. He handed me a chilled glass of vintage Italian wine and kissed the top of my head, wrapping his strong arm around my shoulders. I opened my encrypted tablet, reviewing the morning financial reports. My cybersecurity firm had officially gone public the day prior. The initial public offering had shattered market expectations, securing my status as one of the youngest and wealthiest self-made female tech billionaires in the country. The name Maya Jenkins no longer existed in the corporate registries. The toxic legacy of my mother bloodline had been entirely erased. I was Maya Davenport now, a woman who built an empire entirely on her own terms, completely free from the suffocating weight of a family that only viewed me as an exploitable asset. True Black excellence was defined by integrity and resilience, not by pretending to be wealthy for the approval of strangers. As I leaned back against my husband, watching the yachts glide peacefully across the pristine Italian waters, I realized the ultimate truth about survival. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred foundation that must be preserved at all costs. We are taught to endure disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional violence simply because the people inflicting the pain share our genetic code. We are expected to carry the crushing burden of their toxic vanity and label it loyalty. But loyalty without mutual respect is just a hostage situation. When a branch of a tree becomes diseased, infected with a rot that threatens to spread and poison the entire organism, you do not politely ask the disease to heal itself. You do not pour water on the rot and hope for a miracle. You take a saw and you brutally, unapologetically amputate the dead weight. You sever the toxic roots to save the life of the tree. I cut off the decay, and in doing so, I finally allowed myself to bloom. The most powerful lesson from this story is that shared DNA does not give anyone the right to exploit you. Society often demands that we tolerate abuse in the name of family loyalty, but true family is built on mutual respect, not manipulation. When the people who are supposed to love you choose a fake public image over your well-being, you have every right to walk away. Cutting ties with toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. You must cut away the diseased roots so you can finally bloom. Your peace and your future are worth protecting at all costs. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering content.